Dave, thanks for sitting down with me today. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me, Shawn.
Pretty nice spot you folks have picked here for your meeting up here in Whistler.
Yeah, the presidents get a bit of say, and we try to move around the country. So it's been 10 years actually since we were in Whistler, but the first time at the Fairmont here, and it's a gorgeous location. Haven't actually seen much of Whistler yet, but meetings are up tomorrow, so hopefully.
Perfect. Get to spend some time. Good man. So it's been 2 years since you were appointed executive director of CSTA. I'm sure you've had lots of ups and downs and fun and joy. Can you talk to me a little bit about what would you say has been your biggest challenge and your biggest win since coming on as executive director?
Yeah, so on the challenge side, I think it's also one of our biggest opportunities, which has been sort of inheriting the conversation which began on seed synergy and bringing groups together. And I think, when I first started at CSTA 7 years ago, the relationship between the CSGA and the CSTA, was amicable, but often at times we were publicly opposing each other on various things. And there was that very clear sort of delineation between the two organizations. And so I think that seed synergy and, maybe a bit of the changing of the guard has really allowed us to embrace the fact that we're all part of the industry, whether it's companies contracting growers or growers that, act like retailers and companies as well. So I think that's been the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity. And I think that, it's not just CSGA, but the other seed synergy partners. And so I think that's been a big challenge. But I mean, now we see that we're closer than we ever have been before, and we're hosting a joint meeting with CSGA. And we're very open, very collaborative, resource sharing. And I don't think that I could have ever really envisioned us getting as close as we are these days. So I think that's been a challenge, but again, a real opportunity to do a better job for our collective members, because taking one part out and saying you're this, we're this, and we're in different camps, I don't think our members really feel like that. So I'm glad to see that sort of the tide is turned.
Yeah, perfect. A challenge and a win.
Yeah. And on the challenge side, I think a big one was the industry, and this is maybe more on the trade side, is going through just unprecedented changes. So with the really high profile mergers and acquisitions, as well as smaller ones. So I think a win that we've had, I think, is that CSTA is still at the 130 company mark, even though we've seen two massive companies become one. So I think what we're seeing is interest from, I would say, not untraditional, but different folks. Large seed growers, which are small or medium-sized companies, as well as folks that service the industry. We've got some exhibitors here that are in the equipment manufacturing space. So I think that's been a big opportunity, and it's resulted in both 2018 and then 2019 again setting record numbers of membership fees. And I think that's a result of people seeing value. But again, it's about we're attracting new companies, and I think that's important because the strength in numbers, not only from the finance, but when we communicate with officials that we're not 10 companies, we're 130, and maintaining that mark, I think, has been, especially the last couple of years, has been a real win for us.
The composition of the CSTA team has changed as well. You've added Liz, you've added Lauren. Can you tell me why is that going to be of benefit to the members going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's, I kind of pitched the executive committee when they were going through the headhunt and hiring process was that I really saw that the team needed to expand and we needed 5 full-time people. And as I moved up from the director of government affairs, I think people naturally thought you're going to backfill your own position. And I think, one of the things we needed was a more technical, which is why we brought Claudio on. And then as we got, more established, there's definitely a need for help on the government relations advocacy side. And I think that although we're a national association, and for a lot of years that was our marching orders, I think it's hard to communicate with members where there's no provincial trade association, and there's only the one in Quebec, that, you've got issues that are regional, that are province specific, and agriculture is a shared jurisdiction. How do you sort of look your members that pay you fees and participate and sponsor to tell them that, well, that's not our problem because we deal with Ottawa. So I think bringing on Lauren Martin was a great addition because one, she's a resident farm kid. She grew up on a farm, so has that. And she was also working for the Organic Trade Association before. And I think one thing CSTA does not lack is diversity of opinions with over 50 crop kinds. So I think it's important to understand all the angles. And then the fact that she was a lawyer, bringing that sort of really analytical and way to set things up in a way that is very as a litigator would do, as she used to do. And then the real focus on the provinces. And I think the three provinces where we've got the most challenges are currently Alberta with their fusarium regulations, Ontario with their Class 12 neonic regulations, and then in Quebec with the Class 3A regulations. So having someone that can dedicate more of their time to that and then assist in the federal stuff. And then bringing on Liz Lumsden, who joined us less than 3 months ago. As our manager of communications and member services. Again, I think oftentimes, I know it's cliche that we're great at talking to ourselves and that narrative, but it's true. We get very technical, we get very detailed, we get into acronyms almost immediately, even over coffee or a cocktail. It's just part of our lexicon. So I think bringing on Liz was great because she's communications professional and spent over 6 years as a senior communications advisor in the Ontario Public Service. And while she didn't work on agriculture, that's maybe not such a bad thing for a communicator. While our members are certainly our core audience, there's also other people that that have impacts. And I think we see science doesn't win the day in the age of social media. So the fact that she spent time in deputy ministers' offices and worked on environment, international trade, and natural resources, there's a lot of carryover. And I think a lot of what we see in the natural resource sector hold a lot of, there's a lot of learnings there, whether it's transportation or urban populations not understanding those industries, but also being huge economic pieces. So it's always tough when you're bringing new folks on, but I think it's important that the team gels, and they seem to. But I think it's really been about we're a multidisciplinary team and having folks that can complement each other in ways that we don't all need to be scientists, we don't all need to be lawyers, but a balance of all of them is important, especially in a small staff team.
Absolutely. And in the last couple of years, CSTA has invested a lot in speaking to this, we will call it non-ag audience, society at large, with projects like Better Seed, Better Life. These are projects that are trying to portray the positive messages about the Canadian seed industry. And I think that's a critical message going forward, one that we in the past have thought we didn't really need to do. And now we know we probably should have been, and now we need to be doing that. Why is that so critical from your perspective?
Well, I think the first part you touched on is, it's up to someone else to do it. And again, just like everything, we recognize that there's no silver bullet, and the Better Seed, Better Life is not going to, turn people away from, buying non-GMO verified products. But I think it's a recognition that we have a role to play, and that what resources obviously are finite, but if we don't tell our story, who will? So, and to be frank, we wouldn't have been able to bring the Better Seed, Better Life program on as far as we have without the assistance of our American sister association, ASTA, who really did the polling to understand, when you're talking about our industry, whether it's plant breeding innovation and biotechnology or pesticides or, gene editing and all these sorts of things that can sound scary, what's the best way to communicate that? And I think one of the things that ASTA found was that it's, talking about seed improvements. And, you don't have to be involved in agriculture, but you're eating 3 meals a day. Maybe you're having a beverage. 9 out of 10 bites of food start with the planting with seeds. So what we've tried to do is not get into anything controversial, not get into anything that, regulatory is pushing an agenda, but just talking about how what the seed industry has done is not brand new. It's a continuation of thousands of years. When folks first started, hey, that looks good to eat, and they started selecting plants and started domesticating plants, started thousands of years ago, and it's been a continuation. So just trying to understand that agriculture is a huge industry. Seed is the start of that, the first step, and that the things that our members do and their plant breeders do improve people's everyday lives, whether it's keeping the cost of food down. And now we're getting into perhaps, low gluten wheat, high protein wheat, bigger emphasis on peas and lentils and those sort of supplementary proteins. That those things don't just come about. Varieties aren't found on the shelves. It takes years and years of research. So Better Seed, Better Life is just a way for us to start communicating our message. And one of the exciting things we've done is recognizing staff time is limited, as we've partnered with Agriculture in the Classroom Canada. It's a great way for us to spend some resources. They do great work trying to get at the school age to understand agriculture without an agenda. They're not there pushing biotechnology, but just trying to raise that base level of understanding. Because as someone who grew up outside of Toronto, the agriculture was not talked about in any sort of school system. And I think it will also allow us that when Ag in the Classroom hosts meetings around the country, we can perhaps come and just talk about Better Seed, Better Life. Again, we're not there to talk, trade issues or anything. We're there to talk about just the basics of how seed improves people's lives.
We continue the conversation about seed synergy.
Yes.
My question for you is, what gets you most excited about the future when you know where we're at right now and you know, but you don't know? Where you project where we're headed, what gets you most excited about that?
Well, I know, again, I think it's that continuation of the work that's been started in the past, but I think it's been great to see 6 organizations come together, and much like we ask our board and members that are competitors to do when they like kind of enter our hallowed grounds, is that this is about what's best for the members we serve, and the sort of friendships and professional relationships we built have taken us to an area that we really trust each other, and it's not an easy thing. We're talking about 5 organizations becoming one. Right now there's heads of 5 organizations, and so I think what makes me most excited is that we're able to just take off our old hats and take off our old affiliations, like I spoke about earlier, of just, well, the trade is here and the growers are here and the analysts are here and the processors are here. We're all part of the same industry. Not one of them can operate independently of one another. So what makes me excited is the idea of a consolidated single organization. The one voice thing, I think, is more of a unified voice, because you do have to have, whether it's a technical discussion, a policy discussion, but a unified voice where we do what's best for our members, and we only do things that provide value, and we get away from, well, that's the way it's always been. And I think it's really important to focus on what can we do, and if it's a matter of us providing those services, but what can we do so that our members, wherever you sit in the spectrum, can spend more of their days focusing on their core business and less of it dealing with how they interact with 6 associations, or how they interact with regulations and burdens that aren't about health or safety. They're just holdovers from the time when everything was subsidized by the taxpayer, and we've seen government retreat from the resources but not the burden. So I think what makes me excited is that our members can be more successful, and to do so, they've got one landing spot for communications, for advocacy, for regulatory services, for the HR and admin, and professional development. So what makes me excited is that hopefully there won't be a 98th CSTA AGM. Hopefully it will have, we'll be starting Seed Canada, or whatever we describe it as, their first annual meeting, and move away from companies having to sit on 5 of the 6 boards to ensure that they're in the loop. And I think that we can get so much more done if we don't have 6 separate processes to run through, especially nowadays, where we're ultimately almost always ending at the same policy discussion, but we're delayed 18 months because of our separate board processes. So that's what makes me excited and keep wanting to do this.
Awesome. Tough to not get excited about it.
Yeah.
We got export issues. We've got internal discussions about seed synergy. We've got relationships with China, with the United States, with Europe. There's a lot of moving pieces. If you get to look into your crystal ball, because I know you keep one, what do you see as the future for the seed sector in Canada?
Well, I think it's, one of the keys is, besides what we've talked about governance and structure of an organization, we need our members to continue to innovate. And when it comes to the trade side, we need to diversify. I know that when I worked in politics, I worked on 3 free trade agreements. And the reasons were that they were not barn burner deals necessarily, but it's that we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. And we've seen what can happen if the U.S. closes their border for a few days and then for good reasons, that some industries never really recovered fully. And I think as we're looking towards whatever the crystal ball new world order is, that China is very bullish, and I think that as we look forward, that they're going to again look to double their GDP in 20 years. That that this sort of behavior could be, we're going to be a superpower, and this is how we're going to behave. So I think it's key to build and strengthen our relationships with China, and that can be done in multiple different ways. Participated in the trade mission to Beijing last fall, getting to know the local companies there that would have influence within their structure, because for sometimes they rely on Canadian exports. But I think to solve major trade disputes, it requires the highest levels of government to communicate, and I think it requires Canadian politicians at the highest level to take strong stances. And but I think the key is for us is to continue to innovate, and we've seen what can happen with specific commodities being shut down. When I see 50 crop kinds in my membership and 89% of my company's R&D going to 3 crop kinds, I'm hoping tools like value creation, plant breeding innovation, and gene editing, we can get more investment in other crop kinds, so that we're not so susceptible to one commodity market. But I do think that that's key. And as we're doing that, we need to encourage our government to pursue new deals, and whether they're bilaterals or multilaterals like the CPTPP, so that we can never be we're never adversely affected by just one market shutdown, and not even just one market, but one commodity within that market. So I think we need to continue, and I think if we can add value creation and gene editing and show return on investment like we see in canola and corn and soybeans to pulses and barley and oats, that'll really help insulate us from whether it's commodity prices, a key market shutting down, a lack of acceptance in places like the EU of modern agriculture. We need to diversify in order to. It's like having your own investment portfolio. You don't put it all in Bitcoin. You have to diversify in order to we can weather the storm. So again, with like everything, there's no silver bullet, but I think there's things that we can do, and I think we're getting close to hopefully changes to our plants with novel trait system to allow gene editing to enter the market, value creation, allow for return on investments, and continue to push our government colleagues to. China is important, but we've also got India. We've got other countries where we have trade issues that we should be looking to negotiate. So that would be, my crystal ball is that Canada's gonna be well positioned, but we have a very defined growing season. There's countries in the world that can grow year round, and we have very distinct seasons. So we need to make sure that everything we do, we capitalize.
Well said. Well said. So changing gears a little bit, if you could fully fund one seed research, and that's going to be pretty general and vague for you to pick from, one seed research program, if you could fully fund it, that would change the face of the seed industry and maybe even agriculture in general, what would it be and why?
I think it would have to be in plant breeding, and what the scope of it would be hard to say, but really looking at the how we can use these gene editing systems in crop kinds that have not benefited from technology. That cereals we're hearing a lot about this week. When you look at the amount of acres of wheats and barley and oats and forages and pasture and grassland, and while those varieties are still delivering, but some of these are developed in the 60s or 70s. So if we can really have, an investment climate, an environmental regulatory climate that allows to pursue technology and advancements in breeding in those other crop kinds. So what I'd love to see is, the increased disease resistance, early maturation, getting to see crops where geographically could only be grown in the east, being able to be grown in northern Saskatchewan. So I think really increasing the level of discourse on and plant breeding around the other crop kinds, the 47 other crop kinds, I think that would be huge, because I think it also allows for rotation options. So it's not, canola and canola and canola, then what do we have to do? It's, maybe canola, soybeans, oats, barley, hybrid rye. So I think if we can really start, my dream of that space would be to apply the level of sophistication in plant breeding that we have in select crop kinds and add that to the others. And we're seeing some advancements with hybrid rye, with some of the alfalfas that benefit from biotechnology. That's huge, because it means less chemistry putting on the ground, hopefully less tillage, and better yields, and just more. I think it's more tools in the toolbox, so that when a grower has to decide what they want to plant, they don't have 3 or 4 choices, because those are the ROI. They've got soil health and all these other things that can come into the frame. And I think to do that, again, we need a climate that allows our folks here to innovate. We've got 30 years of biotechnology without ever one health incident. Like, there's no industry, whether you're in meat or produce, that has the same level of health and safety track record that we do. And yet we're stifled by a lack of understanding of the regulatory burden or even the process. And if we can remove some of those obstacles and get new companies and new plant breeders looking at things in a different way, looking at different crops in a different way, I think that's how the Canadian agriculture landscape is going to change and move away from those the position from those opposed to modern agriculture about monoculture. Oh, it's just one crop kind. Well, farmers have to eat. Farmers have bills to pay, and if we give them more options, I think that would be my goal.
I like it. Well said. David, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Shawn.